This is the second character, but the third of my series. And in some ways, I feel like it's one of the more difficult people to teach. Um, I imagine many people have not heard very much about George Steiner, if anything. Um, Probably less likely to have read any of his books. I'm going to show you his bibliography because it is very, very impressive. Um, and But his views on certainly the state of Israel and the Jewish people in the diaspora is going to be challenging. I think it's extremely challenging. Um, I do want to say from the outset, I may repeat this a few times, that Steiner is not a self-hating anti-Semitic Jew, right? It may feel like that a little bit, but he is not. He is a very brilliant academic, and he has a very specific uh, view on two things, I think. One is the role of the Jewish people in the world, which is fascinating. And the second thing is whether the state of Israel is a good thing. When we talk about Steiner's view of the state of Israel, we're not talking about a particular government or policy, but we're talking about the gadol, right? The whole idea of statehood for the Jewish people, whether he feels that's a good thing or not. Um, and it's a little bit strange, because from an Orthodox perspective, the idea that the Jewish people will be sovereign in the land is something that we want. It's something we pray for 3 times a day. We pray for the rebuilding of Jerusalem, Bonei Yerushalayim. We pray for the final redemption, the Messianic era, the Davidic line, right? We say Et Tzemach David, right? So in our Amidah, our silent standing prayer 3 times a day, we ask for these things. And all of the prophecies that look forward to the end of days are all about a time when the Jewish people are sovereign in the land. So it's really interesting to see an argument, albeit coming from a non-Orthodox perspective and not necessarily based in text, that's fine. But this is somebody who's thinking on a philosophical, historical, sociological position. So I think I'm pretty sure that you're going to find Steiner quite challenging. I certainly do. There is one point we'll see as we go along. There's one point where I think he is 100% correct, even though it doesn't, go down very well. And you'll see as I go along, you can all like put your hands up and say, this is the point that Barry is talking about. So I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint. Okay. Good. So hopefully it's going to go full screen, but right. Hopefully you can all see that. Meira, give me a thumbs up. I'm sure you can see that. Yeah. I mean, I said just give me a thumbs up. I could have left it there and you could just be giving me a thumbs up, but I meant you can see the screen, obviously. So that's good. Okay. So this is a picture of George Steiner. He looks the Oxford Don, like Isaiah Berlin. Lots of pictures of him looking very studious and brilliant, which is what he was. Um, I am super excited. At the end, as I did last week, I'll very briefly introduce my next character, Eric Fromm, who in some ways is my favorite. And then we'll go on to Buber and Ozick. So as we've done each week, and we will continue to do, we'll give some background. And as we saw with Berlin, as hopefully you'll recall, but with Berlin, right, the whole experience of the February and October revolutions in Russia really modeled how he was going to think for the rest of his life. He was very anti-violence, and that was like the basis of everything. It was all about freedom. In a similar way, Steiner, who has a different experience, will see how this experience of his growing up formulates his ideas on what Jews should be doing. So Francis George Steiner, born in 1929 in Paris to Viennese Jewish parents. Now, it's really important because this next line, which would seem not to be hugely significant in terms of thinking about somebody's life, I think is part of the most important um, thing that formulates how Steiner thinks. So 5 years before he was born, his parents moved from Austria, they were a Viennese family, to France, and that was because of the growing threat of anti-Semitism. So that's quite interesting because it means in 1924, 5 years before Steiner's born, his parents or his father were aware of growing anti-Semitism. We normally think of Austria, Germany, and the rise of Hitler as being, the early 1930s, but this is really early. And Steiner's father believed that Jews were endangered guests wherever they went. Uh, and this is fascinating, again, because the idea of being guests is something that is extremely important to Steiner's thinking. And we said last week, one of the things I said in the first week when I briefly introduced each of our thinkers, Steiner was a real polyglot, spoke multiple languages, and his father gave them those languages because he thought we were going to have to move around. The Jewish people are not safe staying in one place. I mean, I think about this an awful lot. And I try not to make my shir a sad place. But, on October 6th, 2023, we would not have believed that today we would be 24 hours after two people are shot dead in Washington, D.C. Two Jews. It's inconceivable to us, I think. Maybe my generation or younger, I don't know. But on the streets of London, anti-Semitism, it's just shocking. But Steiner's father in the early 20s sees this and he teaches his children languages. And Steiner grew up, this is fascinating, with three mother tongues. I mean, I have one mother tongue, which is English. I also speak rubbish and nonsense. Those are my three mother tongues. But for Steiner, it was German, English, and French. His mother was multilingual. And she would often, it was said, begin a sentence in one language and end it in another. Right? I do that, but that's just because I'm confused. When he was 6 years old, and I love this, right? His father taught him the classics, and he read the Iliad in its original Greek. It's funny, I don't want to give away my age, but the first digit starts with 5. I know I don't look old enough, but I'm in my 50s. I'm about to, please God, finish my PhD. And when I finish my PhD, I've thought, what's my next project? And I thought I might like to learn Greek so that I can read Greek philosophy. It's a mishegas. I know it's a mishegas, but I feel like I'm going to be too old, right? It's going to be hard to learn a new language in my 50s. And Steiner learned to read the Iliad in Greek when he was 6. So it's a special family, and it's a family built on, firstly, highly developed understanding of languages, obviously intellectually brilliant, and also the inherent dangers involved in being Jewish and the need to be always moving. And that's very much part of Steiner's upbringing. So after he moves to France, or he grows up in France, he moves to the States in 1940. So, he essentially misses the war, which is good news for him and his family. From 56 to 58, he was scholar at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, a Fulbright professorship in Innsbruck, Austria from 58 to 59. He was back in Princeton in 59. And then he became a founding fellow of Churchill College, Cambridge in 61. And it's fascinating because if you remember last week, Isaiah Berlin was also a founder of a new college, right? So we're talking about, exceptional people. Um, he then became a founding fellow of he was founding fellow of Churchill College. He was not received well at Cambridge, and some disapproved of his this charismatic firebrand with a foreign accent, and questioned the relevance of the Holocaust he constantly referred to in his lectures. I mean, you've got a Jew who's moved out of Europe during the Second World War, and it's 1961, and he's talking about the Holocaust. He should be forgiven, but they obviously didn't like him very much. I'm not going to say they were anti-Semites, I don't know, but he wasn't very popular. Now, I want to show you just briefly. I only have a couple of his books, to be fair. One of the books I'll show you in a second. I just want to share another screen. This is just taken from a specific Wikipedia page, which is his bibliography. So there's a page about his life, obviously, but this is his bibliography. Make it a bit bigger. Suffice it to say, the first thing he writes is 1952, and then this is an incredible list of the top. That's page one that goes down to errata 97, and then if we I'm just going to move my bar here. The top of this page, as long as it doesn't, we've got even more books, and that goes through to 2011. There's a key book. We'll see. One of the key books is I like my unwritten books. I have that. If people are looking for recommendations, In Bluebeard's Castle, which is where I started my journey with Steiner, and there's one other. Errata and Unexamined Life is an interesting collection as well. But he was very much writing about literature, about language, and an essayist, and just put out so many books. It's fantastic. Anyway, I don't know if any of you are academics, publishers, book writers, but I've just had my first chapter in a book published. It's super exciting for me, and I have the book, and it was such hard work writing one chapter of a book, like 7,000 words. And I don't know how some of these academics are able to, you know, forget academics, people like Rabbi Sachs, who literally wrote a book a year while he was chief rabbi. I mean, chief rabbi was not a part-time job, but Steiner writes an incredible volume of material. Okay. So I've already compared a little bit with Berlin, and because both of them have started a new college uh, in Oxford, which is great. But there's another similarity which only struck me when I was preparing this lecture, because we said about Berlin last week, he was the man who rescued British philosophy from its parochialism and showed that ideas are not timeless, they're set in time. So Berlin was there to expand people's ideas, to think more broadly, and really, open a whole new way of thinking for these, crusty Oxbridge professors. And Steiner, we're told, he was the first telling those who would listen in Britain about Heidegger, Benjamin, Paul Celan, now work on those figures as an industry. But in the 1960s, he was the only one talking about these people. A rebel who made us aspire to be European, he helped move British culture from utter provincialism to cosmopolitan, I can't even say the word, cosmopolitanism. Okay, that's the problem with using long words. So they have lots of similarities in terms of their Jewish thinkers. They are brilliant, and they write lots, but they also, bring something to the world that's bigger than them, and that's really quite something. So I'm just going to give you one quote, because I think it's a lovely quote about this book in Bluebeard's Castle. Oh, there's a typo there. I will correct that. Not now. In Bluebeard's Castle. I put typos in there so people correct me, but none of you corrected me. The book was called Some Notes Towards the Redefinition of Culture. And unlike Berlin in some ways, Berlin's writings are, I would say, very accessible. And Steiner's are less so. But this book is made up of 4 brief lectures which have these themes which go together, which deal with the fragmentation and dissolution of Western culture from the French Revolution onwards. Right? It's the end of Western culture that Steiner is interested in. And what's interesting from our point of view, from a Jewish point of view, is that this was from the perspective of a break with tradition, whether Jewish, Christian, Greek, or Latin. So he looks at ancient traditions and how they sort of evolved and developed into this pinnacle of Western culture, and then it slowly falls away. And he has this idea, meditation, of what a future culture might look like as we go forward. And the book deals with one of his, as the professors in his university were complaining, one of his perennial concerns was the long-term ramifications of the Holocaust on our cultural values and cultural productions. The questions that arise from it in terms of the growth and development of anti-Semitism over time. I mean, that's why, in some ways, some of the things these writers are talking about are outdated, and in some ways, they're really relevant today. I had the privilege of going on a trip to Poland twice. I went to Poland in 1990 as a student at school, and then I went again in 1999 as a tour guide leader with the group. And the whole, it's very emotional. It's terrible to go to the camps and go to where the ghettos were. But you sort of had some hope. I mean, for me as a kid in the early 1990s, never again meant something, right? Never again absolutely meant something. And, thank God, although October 7th was terrible and, the worst day since the end of the Holocaust for the Jewish people, there are other Holocausts going on, right? There are other genocides around the world going on where people are being massacred. And Steiner, wanted to see some improvement in the world. In Steiner's view, the existence of the Holocaust meant that the long trajectory of Western culture was effectively finished. And as my good friend and teacher, Rabbi Dr. Mark Shapiro, often says, that it just beggars belief that in Germany, the high culture of Germany in the early 20th century could produce that. So Western civilization and culture reaches the pinnacle in Germany and then is all blown away with the Holocaust. So if you're going to read one of Steiner's books, in Bluebeard's Castle you could probably pick it up cheap. I'm not sure if it's been reprinted recently, but it's a very important book. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do for most of this year is I'm going to share with you an interview that was published as a book between Steiner and somebody else, where she asks him really good probing questions, and I think we get the clearest view of Steiner's views on Israel, Judaism, and it was also towards the end of his life. I think the interview was about 3-4 years before he died. So, we have all of his wisdom. And in Haaretz, this quote, which I found really quite to the point of what Steiner thought, and we'll see if we agree. Well, we will agree. It is the Jews' otherness, their alienation, and the absence of a territorial patrimony that explains, in George Steiner's view, their contribution to civilization. Now, that one line has so much in it. I didn't even put that in bold, italics, right? But we are other. There's something Jewish otherness about us, right? We are alienated. We are separate from everyone. And we don't have a land, right? We are nomads. Um, and that is our contribution to civilization, says Steiner. Um, I'm very mindful that Rabbi Sachs writes about this a lot, that we're told, God took you out of the land of Egypt and with a strong arm, and you should look after the stranger, the widow, and the orphan because you were strangers in a strange land. Right? That being other is really important in Judaism. We can only recognize that there is such a thing as other that we need to care for because we were other. The prophets, almost week in and week out in the Haftarot, right? When we read from the books of the prophets, they're saying you're not looking after the weak in society. The prophets say, we're not interested in, God is not interested in your sacrifices in the temple. You've got to look after the other, the weak, the poor. And for Steiner, this otherness is really central. Now, whether this is a throwaway comment or, I don't know if Steiner said this directly, but the implication is there, the homeland of the Jews is the book, not the soil. I mean, it's a lovely one-liner to throw out there. But as I said at the beginning, when I was introducing this, I'm skeptical that that's a Jewish idea. The Jewish idea is that the land of Israel, you only have to read Rabbi Cook, Abraham Isaac HaKohen Cook, and think about the Kedusha, the holiness of the land. And when Jews are connected to the land and doing mitzvot in the land, that we are people of the soil. I mean, kibbutzim are less active than they used to be, but we're still people of the soil. But I want you to keep this in mind because it's going to be the theme that we see in Steiner. And I want you to think about it from, is there something important in what he's saying that from an Orthodox perspective we should be thinking about?
Does he quote Avraham Avinu, who says, Ger v'toshav anochi?
I didn't hear that. Sorry, say that again?
Does he quote Avraham Avinu, who says to Ephron, Ger v'toshav anochi?
I don't remember seeing him quote anything particularly like that, but we're going to see what he says in a bit more detail in a second. But it's a good question. Yeah, okay. A lot of these thinkers, it's fascinating. The challenge of a course like this, by the way, and I'm very aware of it, is that, these thinkers are not interested in what Orthodox Judaism or the Torah necessarily says. But I still feel like they have something to teach me or to challenge me because they are very brilliant people who were Jews who were thinking about what it means to be Jewish. I don't even like to think of them as outsiders. I know the title of the course is Unorthodox, but that's just one way of delineating them. So, this is the conversation in 2017, a long Saturday, conversations by George Steiner with I don't know how you say Lore Adler. And I don't put this on the top of every screen, but you'll see who's asking the questions and who's responding. So she asks, or he asks, not sure, I think it's a she, the Jewish question which has haunted your entire life goes well beyond the existence of Israel. The settling of a people in a nation state, doesn't it? The Jewish question. So he says that's a crucial question. I have great contempt for armchair Zionists. Great. Who practice Zionism without ever wanting to set foot over there. The only time I had the huge privilege of meeting Ben Gurion very briefly, he said to me, "Only one thing matters, send me your children." And then she says to him, "Which you didn't." Right. So, but it's really interesting that she says to him that your entire life, and we're going to see that he doesn't really identify in any way strongly as a Jew, um, has been haunted by the question of the existence of Israel. That's the Jewish question. You know, for some people, it's whether they identify as Jewish, whether they have any Jewish practice. Remember, Isaiah Berlin, even if it was only in honor of his mother, kept Leil HaSeder, right? He had Seder night every year while his mother was alive. He also fasted on Yom Kippur and went to shul wherever he was in the world. Steiner is very different. But he does have a burning Jewish question, and that's whether the state of Israel, you know, has meaning or purpose. And then he says, I am fundamentally anti-Zionist, right? I apologize if any of you are strongly Zionist. I'm strongly Zionist, but I don't want to upset you. But I'm fundamentally anti-Zionist. Not me, Steiner. The highest nobility is to have belonged to a people that has never humiliated another people. And now this line and this sentence for me is incredibly powerful. He goes on and says, or tortured another. And then he says, but today Israel must necessarily, I stress this word and will repeat it 20 times if I could, necessarily, inevitably, inescapably kill and torture in order to survive. Israel must behave like the rest of so-called normal humanity. There is something negative, or there is something dirty about being a nation state when you have to defile yourself. Right? He doesn't use this language, but once you are in a position of power, things go wrong, says Steiner. And you know, if you take one line away from this, and you know, it's obviously an ideal. The highest nobility is to have belonged to a people that has never humiliated another people. Now, you might just say it's a pipe dream. He's just, you know, he's just being naive and it's just silly. But he wants something else from the Jewish people. I find it fascinating. If we think about it from a biblical perspective, King David, is not allowed to build the temple. Why? Because it says in the book of Chronicles he had blood on his hands, too much blood on his hands. He waged war. Even if we don't say he did any particular sins, he waged war. Being in power means you have to go to war. If you go to war, you're tainted. And by the way, I'm not in any way linking this to the current situation. I'm not criticizing anyone. I'm just giving this to Steiner. Shlomo HaMelech, although he builds the temple, right, he has the merit to build the temple, ultimately, there are multiple times he gets things wrong and sins because he has too much power. So being sovereign in the land and creating, building the temple, the temple, these things do not guarantee in any way that we're going to behave appropriately. The highest, I'm going to say again, because for me, this is the most important part of the shir. And it sets us, you know, we have to be a light unto the nations. He doesn't say we shouldn't protect ourselves. The highest nobility is to belong to a people that's never humiliated another people or tortured another. But today, Israel must necessarily, inevitably, inescapably kill and torture in order to survive. Israel must behave like the rest of so-called normal humanity. And that's not our job, believes Steiner. We shouldn't be like everyone else. And then he says, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, but I once read a quote that said the job of a teacher is to make their students feel uncomfortable. And I think in these classes, to make us think a little bit is good. He says, and this is 2017, when I look from the top of a wall at the long line of Palestinian workers trying to get to their daily jobs, standing in blistering heat, I can't help seeing the humiliation of those human beings in that line. And I've done it. I've been in the West Bank and I've been in refugee camps, and I have seen some of the humiliation that he's talking about. There is humiliation. We shouldn't pretend there isn't. I say to myself, it's too high a price to pay. To which Israel answers, be quiet, you fool. Come here, live with us, share our danger. We are the only country who welcome your children if they have to flee. So what right do you have to be so morally superior? And I have no response. Now, this paragraph is wonderful, if challenging, because he writes that the response for Israel is when you have to run, who else is going to take you but Israel? And he was brought up knowing that he would always have to flee. And there's a tension here, because on the one hand, it should be the case that he would be grateful for the state of Israel. But on the other hand, he poses the question, is it too high a price to pay? What should our moral compass tell us to do and how to behave? Okay. And this is, again, I think, stunning insight and very Jewish, right? Whoever is thrown into life has a duty to that life, an obligation to behave as a guest. Remember, his father brought him up to think that we are endangered guests. What must a guest do? He must live among people wherever they may be. And a good guest, a worthy guest, leaves the place where he's been staying a bit cleaner, a bit more beautiful, a bit more interesting than he found it. I don't know about you, but when I have guests staying in my house, I love having guests. There are two types of guests that stay in my house. There are those that strip the beds after they stay, and those who leave the bed linen on. I know which I prefer. And it sounds like a joke, but those who leave it a bit cleaner, a bit more beautiful, they're thinking about me as the host. That after Shabbat goes out, I've got a lot to do and I don't want to be stripping beds. If you ever come and stay in my house and after this year you don't take the linen off the beds, I'll be very upset with you. You're all welcome to come and stay anytime. Steiner says we've got to be good guests. We've got to offer to help. We've got to leave it a bit more. It's interesting. It's a bit cleaner, but a bit more beautiful, a bit more interesting. And we can see where this will go when it comes to the Jewish people. And if he must leave, he packs his bags and leaves. Right? When you've outstayed your welcome as a guest, you go. And he doesn't. It's not a positive or negative thing. It's just the metziut, it seems to me, for Steiner. The reality is that we're brought into this life as guests, right? Whether you believe in God or not, right? I have a responsibility not to ruin the planet, or I have a responsibility not to behave in a bad way in public or when I'm in someone's house. I haven't visited or lived in any place in the world that hasn't been fascinating, whose language hasn't been worth learning, whose culture isn't worth understanding, where one can't try to do something interesting. The world is incredibly rich. If people don't learn how to be guests of each other, we will destroy ourselves. We will have religious wars, terrible racial wars. It's like, I don't know, live in a neighborhood and not care about your neighbors. Don't go and ask their names, or, not worry about how your fence is, falling over into their garden, or whatever it is, but just apply it on a global scale. I remember first visiting a small place in the world called the United States of America. The first time I was there was over 30 years ago, and I was traveling to different places. And as a young Englishman at the time, it really grated on me when every shop I went into, the people in the shop working would say, "How are you, sir? Have a nice day." And as an Englishman, you don't talk to strangers generally, and you hide behind your newspaper, and it's a stiff upper lip, and there's no politeness to people you don't know. It's just not British. And as I got older, I realized that even if it's done, because you're trained to do it, not because you mean it, that if everyone is polite to each other as a guest is to a host. So every time I go into a shop for the last decade, I don't know, and I'm served by a shopkeeper, I say to them, "Thank you very much, have a great day." And it shocks me because every time I see the faces light up and smile, I've just brought a little bit more beauty to the world, a bit more happiness to the world. But Steiner says if that which you don't even dare to consider were to happen, if the unimaginable came to be, if Israel were to disappear, Judaism would survive. It is much greater than Israel. And for him, therefore, Israel is only of minor importance. I imagine that the Jewish people, it's interesting to think about two periods of Jewish history. One is after the destruction of the first temple, how the Jewish people felt, and then after the destruction of the second temple. Because when the first temple was destroyed, they had a prophecy that it was only going to last 70 years. So okay, so I may not live long enough to see the second temple, but my kids or my grandkids will. That's fine. After the second temple is destroyed, and we're still in that galut now, that exile, from then until 1948, I mean, Steiner would argue the Jewish people survived. And they survived because they were moving around from place to place. And God forbid, lo aleinu, it shouldn't happen. If Israel were not here, there would still be Jews in the world doing the thing that Steiner thinks they should. No, he's not. He doesn't want that to happen. We'll see. He says it's too late now. We've got a state and we have to live with it. But it gives us a very interesting focus for what our role of Jews are and the dangers of statehood or nationhood. So he's asked by the interviewer to adopt as you do the attitude of the wandering Jew. Is that to question the existence of Israel? And the wandering Jew is really the central theme here, that the ideal for Steiner is that we are nomadic. He says, no, I don't question it. It was the miracle necessary for the survival of a portion of the Jewish people, but I dare not believe it's the only option, as I said. And I see wandering as a wonderful destiny. To wander among people is to visit them. Now it's interesting because I suppose in some ways it'll be quite good to do Martin Buber next, because Buber's I thou relationship here might fit very nicely. I've never thought about that in the ordering before, but we'll come back to this when we look at Buber. And then he says, and this is, my slide in the beginning of the first class, do you define yourself as a Jew, as a Jewish thinker? No. A European Jew, if you like, a student. I like to consider myself a student. I have teachers. Right? He begrudgingly, accepts that he's a Jew. Um, which is fascinating, right? Berlin, I think, was much happier. He gives himself the Russian heritage and everything, but Steiner's, I think the word would be parov at best, right? He's not meaty, he's not milky. But he's not overly positive about being called a Jewish thinker. So this idea of the wandering Jew is really interesting. And there's a paper I found by this academic Asaf Sagiv called George Steiner's Jewish Problem. It's a very long um, article, but I found it very useful to understand Steiner better. And he says this is what Sagiv is saying about Steiner. The true mission of the Jews is to be found in exile. For us, we dream of the end of the exile, but that's the true mission. It is to be guests among the nations, aliens who live as refugees, restless and dispossessed. Only when they are outside of their homeland, Steiner argues, have the Jews served as the cultural vanguard and moral conscience of the nations as prophets of a lofty and profound human ideal. I think it's really fascinating because the phrase Or LaGoyim gets thrown around a lot, right? The Jews are a light unto the nations. And I think of that, I like to think of it, although I'm not sure we see it in the world all the time, as a moral position that non-Jews would look at the Jewish people and see this moral nation. But for Steiner, it's much more than that, right? It is there, the moral conscience of the nations, but it's the cultural vanguard as well. Prophets of a human ideal. So we're going to see in Steiner's view that the Jewish people play a role in many fields. And he sees that as the ideal. He really sees that as the ideal. By the way, I can see that things are coming up in the chat, and I will get to comments in the chat. I'll allow a few minutes at the end to go through those. So Steiner, in his own words, in his book in 1997, in Errata, says, Stalin and Hitler made of the glorious noun cosmopolitan, with its promise of the inalienable, a murderous sneer. But did not Rashi himself, acutest of Talmudic readers, tell of the everlasting need for Abraham to abandon his tent and rejoin the road? Did Rashi not instruct us that when asking the way, a Jew should prove deaf to the right answer, that his mission lay with being errant, which is to say in error and wandering? As I said, Steiner does not write as nicely as Berlin, but he brings a text from Rashi to say Abraham just wandered around. That was his job. I was teaching yesterday, and I reminded myself of a wonderful book about Moses, and in the beginning of the book, the author, I think it was Rav Moshe Lichtenstein, said, "Why does the Torah tell us a lot more about Moshe's childhood than Avraham's?" Right? At the end of Parshat Noach, we're introduced to Avraham. He's born, and then at the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha, we're told Lech Lecha me'artzecha. He's given the command to leave his family home, and he's already old man then. So why does the Torah not tell us that? Whereas with Moshe, we're told about him being born, about his being put in the river, and about Paro coming, and an Egyptian hitting a Jew, and the Jew hitting another Jew, and then he runs off to the burning bush. We get a whole load of his life. So Rav Moshe Lichtenstein says that Avraham was basically wandering around thinking about the world for 75 years, right? And he was philosophizing. I like that. And that's how he came to God. He came to understand there was a God in the world. And this fits a little bit with what Steiner's saying here. Avram was a wanderer. You're going from place to place. Except what he doesn't bring, obviously, here, Steiner, is that commandment to Avraham at the beginning of Lech Lecha says, Lech Lecha me'artzecha umimoladetcha umibeit avicha, leave your birthplace, your father's house, to go where? To a land that I will show you. So there's a destination at the end of it. So Steiner's not right. There may have been a period of Avraham Avinu's life, Abraham's life, when he was wandering, but he's not destined to wander forever. There's an end.
He's
But
also picking and choosing from Rashi, like Rashi also said that um, Torah starts with creation in order to establish the right of the Jewish people for Israel because they're the people of God who created the world. So like if you pick and choose what you want to
right,
choose, and then
right.
it's wonderful.
Ivanti, I agree. The first Rashi, although the first Rashi in Bereshit is also, I always find it quite amusing that just because God says he created the world to give to the Jewish people, doesn't mean the Jewish people can use it as an argument to say to other people that, but you're right. He can't
But
pick and choose.
no, I agree with you. I'm just saying, but he chooses Rashi, so choose all of Rashi. Rashi says different things at different times.
The good news is I'm not just picking and choosing Steiner. I'm giving you his philosophy.
It's
Okay.
annoying enough. It's upsetting enough.
So I did tell you that at the beginning, so I apologize
I
that
know,
I'm
it's true.
okay.
Can
So
can I just say that I was taught by George Steiner, and he didn't know Hebrew. He was very arrogant, and he humiliated people. I think you should be aware of that
Irene,
before you carry on. Yes.
Dr. Irene Lancaster, I think I can
Yes.
see. I wanted to say actually, I don't know if I've got a note in here. I actually on this slide I have a note that he never learned Hebrew or Aramaic.
No, he was against it, and I had to correct him once as a student. And
Correct.
luckily, a top professor, this is a long time ago, agreed with me. He didn't know the basics, and he hated the idea of Israel. I'm not trying to at all be rude to you, Rabbi Kleinberg. I was also taught by Rabbi Cardoza, and just downloaded your first lecture. Very upsetting, the idea that even if you don't agree with 1%, he is not Orthodox. I interviewed him 2 weeks ago in his place in Herzliya, and he's very pro-Haredi in practice. I mean, Maimonides also was
So,
critical of various things. So I'm not being
Irene,
rude, but it's
Dr.
very
Irene,
upsetting.
Dr. Irene, I'm just going to pause so that we can carry on. Please feel free to message me, call me. I'm happy to discuss it further. We can. I didn't say it wasn't orthodox, by the way. I said the book wasn't orthodox because of 1%. That's a
Well,
very important distinction. I never questioned his orthodoxy. I said the book is very
oh,
important.
that's very good. I don't have your details.
You can get them from the office. So exile. I just want to turn to exile. So Steiner opposes Zionism, and it's really interesting. It's not just because he's against nationalism, but he believes that the Zionist enterprise amounts to nothing less than a rejection of the Jewish universal calling. Right? He's a universalist, but he's not the only universalist. We're not going to deal with them on this course, but Hermann Cohen, Franz Rosenzweig, and other thinkers also believed that there was this universal calling to the Jewish people. On one side, I'm not going to say he felt the same way, but Rabbi Sachs felt there was a universal message that the Jewish people have to get out. If we have a state, we are limited to the state, and we can't get out there. We can't spread the word. So Jews should abandon, according to Steiner, the boring dream of security and normalcy and instead pursue the anomaly of exile. However painful it is, only through estrangement may the Jews learn to serve humanity as moral standard bearers and creative geniuses. Now, I know, by the way, I mean, I know now I know at least two people are upset with me. That's good. I feel like I've achieved my goal now. But no, joking aside, I'm not saying I agree here with Steiner, right? In no way. I know
No,
I'm
but
being.
you chose him. But you chose him.
Oh, because my next sentence is chashuv ma'od, is very important because he challenges us to think about. You see, I don't think he's right about Zionism, about the state of Israel, or the Jewish job in the world. But I do think that we should question through everything he says, are we the moral standard bearers and should we be? In many ways, I think we should be. And I think, unfortunately, we're not. So I think, although he's wrong in many ways, I think he's forcing me to think about my role in the world as a Jew in a way that's really important. And in the Orthodox world, we don't get enough people saying that, right? We really don't. Okay. This is a long quote, and I'm just going to summarize it because I am going to be running out of time. But he talks about the fact that, we've won lots of Nobel Prizes, and, he goes on about it. And that's our job to, make the world better. And then at the end, he says, right, I now have a son who is the dean of a very fine college in New York, a daughter who directs the Department of Antiquity in Columbia, a son-in-law who teaches ancient literature at Princeton. He's not just showing off. He's saying, we Jews, that's what we do, and that's our job, right? That's our job, to go out and show the world. And then he says, back to our interview, because we left the interview for a bit. Yet you've gone to Israel several times to give talks, and he says 5 times, but you've never been tempted to go live there. Oh, yes, in Jerusalem, yes, because it's a transcendently beautiful city, but that's a bad reason. But you still don't challenge the existence of the state of Israel. Now it's too late, he says, right? So he fundamentally disagrees, but he's not. He might be anti-Zionist in a philosophical sense, or in a perfect world sense, but the reality is there, and he's not criticized the actions of the state. He acknowledges that they are necessary. And he said the following, or he's asked the following: for you, being a Jew means belonging to the people of the book and having a desire to study. It's not belonging to a race, it's a desire to learn. And he says, to be a Jew is to belong to that multi-millennial tradition of respect for the life of the mind, of infinite respect for the book, for the text. And it means telling oneself that one's bags must always be packed, that the bags must always be ready to go, without complaining, without shouting about cosmic injustice. No, it's actually a great privilege. And we do have this tradition, this incredible masoret of being the people of the book. Before the last 18, 19 months, I would not have agreed that our bags should always be packed, but maybe he's, not so far from telling us something that's true again. I don't know. I hope not. And in Tablet magazine, and just so you know, I put this in. I knew I was going to get pushback in the whole lecture, but they published in 2019, Steiner's perverse version of the exilic Jew does have the virtue of being genuine, right? It's not because he hates Jews or Judaism or Zionism. He's got this dream. He utters the truth that left-wing contemporary critics of Israel dare not mention. It would be better for Israel not to exist at all. But he didn't say that, right? Tablet Mag is being disingenuous, because we have the interview where he said, that's not what I want. The allegorical morality play of radical and irredeemable Israeli evil thus gave birth to a corrosive new version of anti-Semitism, a sweeping new variant of the world's oldest hatred dressed up as a political idealism. This is not a fair way of. It's interesting. I picked it because I thought it was really challenging. I don't think this is his view, but the anti-Semitism that he's really interested in, which we don't have time at all to deal with, and it's very well developed in the Sagiv article, is he blames anti-Semitism on the Jewish rejection of Christianity as a big part of it. And he develops that part in a few places. So the next slide I've got introduces from, but it's only a quote which I'll bring next week. I'm not going to deal with from. If you feel uneasy or upset, firstly, I'd like to apologize. But on the other hand, I feel that's quite an okay thing. Okay, I hope not too upset, just a little bit upset. But I feel like Steiner is a very he's a hard character, not an easy one for us to read, but an important one. Right, so now I'm going back through the chat. I'm going to go from the beginning, thinking, okay. Okay, I'm going to pick out things that I think. Yeah. Laura Adler was born in 1950. Okay, thank you for that, Surah. Okay, I can see the people upset. Okay. Mira, yeah, I like the fact that he concludes that he's a student. Sorry, I'm going back to chat from a few minutes ago. Not being a thinker, maybe it was a bit of false humility. Surah, thank you for posting the Jewish Problem article. Okay. And Irene, I can see all of it. Okay. Anyway, if anyone wants to come on mic and ask me any questions, I didn't see anything that I felt like I had to massively respond to in the chat. They were all fair comments. I promise you that next week Eric Fromm is going to be more palatable. If you don't turn up next, sorry?
Can I say something, not a question?
Yeah.
So I really don't agree with Steiner. But I've lived in Yehuda v'Shomron most of my life. I've lived through a lot of wars. I lived through Intifadat HaSakinim, and everything he said are things that I've thought about and I've talked about with people, and like I understand why people have like very angry responses to it, but I think they are things that are like, maybe even if Steiner, I can see where he's coming from, even though I disagree him, and I can even see like, even though he didn't read the Torah, he still grew up in a Jewish family, which maybe had like some of the values that led him to those places. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think his whole background is really important in terms of the nomadic, exilic, wandering Jew, going from Vienna to Paris to America, multilingual. His Jewish identity is one, I think it's twofold. I think he's a victim of that moving around, bags should always be packed. And an idealized view of the Jewish people as being this light unto the nations. And as soon as you create, look, Mira, my son is literally with me for 19 hours, and under the chuppah, the rabbi, my son was witness, and the rabbi, just before they said Misha Berach for the Chayalim, the rabbi said, and Eitan Kleinberg, my son, he's just come from Gaza and he's here at a wedding, right? So I lived the life, I know. But let's say that there are 1% of people living in Yehuda and Shomron who have extreme views, right? I'm using 1% because I'm being nice. I think it's more, but let's say it's 1% who have extreme views that are dangerous views, right? Let's say it's 0.5%. I don't really matter. It doesn't matter. For Steiner, having a national state creates the possibility of that. And therefore, you end up in a bad position. Now, I'm not saying I agree with him, but, we believe the Jewish people, we had revelation at Har Sinai. We are the people of the book. We are lights unto the nations. And the danger of having a state is that, right? So I'm not saying I agree with him, but maybe I agree with you that I can see a little bit where he's coming from. I think he got it wrong, but I want him to challenge us to think about that.
I think what he said is irrelevant. I think that the questions are right, but if you take it from the person who doesn't identify with the Jewish people, I think is wrong. So to me, it's not even the question. I think posing the question is correct. I'm not against that, but the source of the question is wrong. So I'm challenging your choice as he's one of the people, because if he didn't identify as a Jew and he was disdaining that to me is the problem. So I don't want to hear from him if he's not identified with the people.
Okay.
And
so
that is, you want to, whatever questions you want to ask is legitimate. I have no problem with that. I think the source of this person, I think, is abhorrent.
Okay, so I will answer to that, one thing to that. His answer was that actually he didn't not identify as a Jew, he identified as a European Jew, which was an interesting way of saying it. Okay. So,
but he also intellectually, I can disagree with him, but on an intellectual level, I think his thing has so many holes and problems with it. As an academic, he's failing in how he approaches it.
That may well be the case. I never said that I was teaching you 5 great thinkers with great arguments that don't have flaws. I particularly picked people that I thought were either so important, like Isaiah Berlin and Martin Buber, that you have to know a bit about them, and other people that people may not have heard of, and or really challenge us. Now, I'm really glad this has got people thinking and pushing back at me, and I'm really happy to hear it. If anyone wants to email me anything, questions, pushback, wants to get into discussion, just email the office, and they have my permission to share my details. I'm very happy to get into discussion with people. And well, Herb, I don't think that I'm not sure how to even formulate an answer to the question because it was just too complicated for me to think about. So anyway, it is now 7:02. I need to get back. The call for dinner was half an hour ago at the wedding that I'm at. It's been a privilege and honor for me to spend an hour with you, but I'm going to go and see my son now and be Mesameach Hatam V'Kala. Next week, thank you. Next week, much less angst with Eric Fromm, please God. Okay, have a great week, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.